Stuart, President Trump has said in the middle of this feud he has no plans to meet with the Pope, and then made false allegations about Leo. Here's part of what he said.
I'm not fighting with him. The Pope made a statement. He says Iran can have a nuclear weapon. I say Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And if the Pope looked at the 42,000 people that were killed over the last 2 or 3 months as a protester with no weapons, no nothing, I mean, you take a look at that. So I can disagree with the Pope. I have a right to disagree. I have a right to disagree with the Pope. The Pope can say what he wants, and I want him to say what he wants, but I can disagree.
Let's just freeze right there. The Pope says Iran can have a nuclear weapon. That is what Donald Trump claimed on the record about the leader of the Catholic Church. And it is not true. The Pope did not say that. That is not a fringe interpretation, not a misread, not an out-of-context quote. It is a fabrication. The analysts on this panel said it plainly. Nobody is going to buy the idea that the Pope wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But Trump said it anyway. Now, here's what makes this more than just another lie. Because Trump lies constantly, and at this point, it barely registers. What makes this one different is who he said it about, when he said it, and what his administration was doing at the exact same moment he was saying it. The Catholic Church is not a fringe institution. There are 70 million Catholics in the United States. They vote. They are organized. They are engaged. And as Stuart Stevens, the man who ran George W. Bush's presidential campaigns, will tell you, Catholics are not a demographic you can afford to lose. Bush won them in 2004. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have been president. And Trump didn't just argue with the Pope. He misrepresented what the Pope said. He put words in the mouth of one of the most universally respected moral figures on earth. And then, watch what happened. His own party went completely quiet. No Republicans rushed to the cameras to say, yes, the president is right, the Pope supports nuclear weapons, because that would be insane. And they know it. So Trump is out there alone on this one, fighting a battle nobody asked him to fight, against an opponent who, as Peggy Noonan put it, and you know it's bad when Peggy Noonan is dunking on you, has a better sponsor and better writers.
Besides it being untrue, I don't know, Stuart, do you think it's unlikely people will buy the idea that the Pope wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon or is oblivious to the deaths of innocent people?
Yeah, first we get off this Pete Hegseth thing. You know, I think there's a very sound theory that Pete Hegseth's staff hates him. And that's why they do this stuff. It's sort of like Anchorman. They know they can put this stuff in a speech, and Hegseth won't know it. And then he'll say it, and he'll look like an idiot. Sort of like the same people who dress him, that put him in these sort of, clown suits. But look, I think about sometimes what it's like to work for Trump. And you're sitting around and you go, okay, we're in a fight with the Pope. Well, what are we going to do? I mean, it is just such a classic unforced error. It's sort of like a punchline to a joke. So what if you got in a fight with the Pope? I mean, Catholics in this country are a key voting bloc. I worked for Bush in 2004. We were tied with Catholics when he ran against Gore. He won them when he ran against Kerry. And if he hadn't, he wouldn't have been president. Many very engaged voters. And I think that people, it's just something about it. There's just one more thing about Trump that just seems just unseemly and weird and creepy. You're fighting with the Pope. I don't know. It's also a good sort of indicator that you don't see a lot of other Republicans taking up this banner to, hey, I'm going to get in a fight with the Pope too. This seems to be working.
Philip, the Wall Street Journal's Peggy Noonan writes this: Leo can take care of himself, adding, to the extent anyone ever wins these things, he will. He has a better sponsor and better writers. So classic Peggy Noonan. Do you see any signs that Donald Trump is beginning to realize this may be the one person in the world he can't win a fight against?
I don't know that Donald Trump views these tensions in that way, right? I think that Donald Trump's default position is that he wants to be the victor, even in a feud like this, which I think is entirely one side. I mean, yes, Leo, the Pope, has said things obviously in response to President Trump and critical of policies, but the direct back and forth is almost exclusively on Trump's side. And I think it's worth noting, my mom is an Episcopal priest. Like I've heard language about akin to what we heard from the Pope in the clip that you showed my entire life. Like this is very standard rhetoric for religious leaders about peace and about and loving one's neighbors and these sorts of things. And I think it really shows. There was this poll that came out this week from Pew Research Center, which showed that very few Americans view Donald Trump as particularly religious, including only half of Republicans. It is understood that he's not a religious person, and I think that again this gets him into trouble because he has increasingly been willing, and his cabinet's been increasingly willing to step into this realm of rhetoric and debate around religion where they're just ill-prepared to engage. And I think that's noticeable to his base, and I think it's noticeable more broadly as well.
And Stuart, while all that's going on, the Trump administration is gutting funding to Catholic charities of the Archdiocese of Miami, which uses the money to run a foster care system for undocumented minors. MS Now's Alex Tabbitt asked Miami's Archbishop about next steps after HHS decided to end that nearly 70-year-long partnership. Listen to this.
You made clear, as I just noted, that this has nothing to do with the feud between the Pope and the President. But does that complicate the process of reinstating this funding, do you think?
They put this stuff in, he won't know it, and then he will say it and look like an idiot. Stuart Stevens just described the Trump White House like a scene out of Anchorman. Staffers and advisors feeding the president false information, maybe to score points, maybe out of carelessness, maybe because the internal chaos is so complete that nobody's checking what goes into his mouth before he says it publicly. And what's the result? The President of the United States standing in front of cameras telling the country that the Pope of the Catholic Church supports Iranian nuclear weapons. That's not a tough policy disagreement. That's not a bold contrarian stance. That's a man saying something provably, embarrassingly false, and apparently nobody in his orbit stopped him. But here's the part of this story that goes beyond the embarrassment. Because while Trump was publicly feuding with Pope Leo, while he was manufacturing quotes, picking fights, acting out, his administration was simultaneously gutting funding to Catholic charities of the Archdiocese of Miami. Nearly a 70-year-old partnership. A program that runs foster care for undocumented minors. Gone. This is where it stops being political theater and becomes something uglier. You have a president invoking God, claiming the moral high ground, wrapping himself in religious iconography in his second term in ways he never bothered with in his first, and at the exact same moment, he's cutting charity programs run by the very church he's supposedly allied with. The Miami Archbishop, when asked whether the Pope feud complicates getting that funding reinstated, gave one of the most carefully diplomatic non-answers you'll ever hear. If everybody acts like an adult, it shouldn't, which is the Catholic Church's way of saying, we see exactly what's happening here. And Philip Bump makes a point that cuts to the core of why all of this resonates beyond politics. A Pew Research poll came out this week showing that only half of Republicans view Trump as particularly religious. Half. His own base doesn't really believe the act. The religious framing, the Bible holds, the scripture references, they know it's a costume. And when you put on a costume and then pick a fight with the actual Pope using made-up quotes while cutting Catholic charity funding, the costume falls off. And everyone can see what's underneath. Stuart Stevens closes with something that's worth sitting with. He compared the current Republican Party to George W. Bush's 2000 convention speech and called Bush's language a document from a lost civilization. Humility, service, decency, not as partisan positions, as basic human values. And his point is devastating precisely because he's not a Democrat making it. He's a Republican strategist saying, the party I spent my career building has been destroyed. and he doesn't know if it's coming back. Here's where we actually are. Trump lied about the Pope's position on Iranian nuclear weapons. That's not commentary. Multiple analysts stated plainly it's false. No Iranian nuclear support position exists in any papal statement. Trump is in a public feud with Pope Leo that, according to his own side's strategists, is an unforced political error with real consequences for the Catholic vote. His administration cut nearly 70 years of partnership funding with Catholic Charities of Miami the same week he's attacking the Pope for a program serving foster children. And not a single Republican has stepped forward to defend him on any of it. Peggy Noonan's line is going to echo, he has a better sponsor and better writers. Because it's true. The Pope is not going to lose a moral argument to a man who held up a Bible upside down for a photo op, who his own base doesn't believe is religious, who fabricated his opponent's position before the debate even started. This isn't just a bad week. This is what happens when you build an entire political identity on performance, on the theater of being strong, being chosen, being righteous, and then pick a fight you had no business picking against someone who doesn't need to fight back hard because the facts are already on their side. Trump started this. The Pope barely responded. And Trump is losing anyway. This is one of those stories where the details matter more than the headline. Read the Pew Research poll. Look up what the Pope actually said. Read Peggy Noonan's full column. And then ask yourself what it says about where we are that a former Republican strategist is on cable news comparing his own party to a lost civilization. Subscribe if you want the full picture, not just the clip. Share this with a Catholic voter in your life. And drop a comment. Do you think Trump understands what he just walked into? Or does he not care?